I wasn't. I think we had talked about speaking about the sort of laws and policies in the countries that we live in, so Britain and you in the United States, on how those affect ex-Muslims and the sort of advocacy work that we're doing. So I think from if we're looking at the question of Britain, even though it's a very secularized society and a large number of people don't really have a religion, they don't necessarily want a religion's role in the state. Britain is not a secular state in any way, shape, or form. So, for example, you've got bishops in the House of Lords, kind of like the Ayatollahs in the Majlis in Iran. You've got prayers in Parliament. I mean, I can't get over that. You know, they pray in Parliament. Prayers in schools, for example. And of course, the Church of England is the established church. And so there's a huge influence that religion plays. And I think, in a sense, when we look at the influence now that Islamists have and Islam has and other religious groups have, it is because there is this privileging of religion, and also there is this attempt to keep hold of the society by the Church of England. And it's a way of giving equal access to other religions, as a way of maintaining its own power too. So, you know, in Britain, we've got Sharia courts, we've got a large number, 1/3 of publicly funded schools, imagine, are faith schools. I mean, it's outrageous, you know. And so there's so many examples where with Sharia courts too. There's a Jewish Beth Din. There's now a Sikh court. It's the first of its kind. There are no Sikh courts in India, but they are the first of its kind is in Britain. So this is a very secular society, but a very religiously privileging society when it comes to the state and public policy and all of that. And of course, that has huge effects on ex-Muslims and atheists in this country. You know, one example, of course, is the freedom of expression issue, which is something that we're all very concerned about. You know, in Britain and in Scotland, blasphemy laws have been abolished. It's still applicable in Northern Ireland, but even though it's abolished, we do have sort of backdoor blasphemy laws via accusations of Islamophobia, for example, and even using things like public disturbance, which is really about disturbing individuals, now being used when Islam is being criticized as a way of sort of silencing dissent and criticism. And that has a huge effect on ex-Muslims because, you know, we need to be able to speak about so many of the issues that we face, and it is quite difficult to do so. And so I think I'll stop there because there's so many things to talk about, but I think I'll stop there and then maybe
so I'll start with drawing a contrast with the US. And so in that sense, we're very lucky in the US. We don't have that state-sanctioned religion aspect of it. The Constitution of the US is very, very clear about how freedom of speech is one of our basic rights. Freedom of and from religion is one of our basic rights. There shall be no interference of practicing of religion. The reality obviously is slightly different, but the First Amendment is about free speech. What happened and has happened over the past decade or two, both in Europe and over here, has been a groundswell from both political sides to try to limit that, as you said, backdoor blasphemy laws. What you experienced at Warwick University, where they tried to shut you down, that happened over here. We had tours that you participated in the US in various cities on campuses, and multiple ones were shut down. And it's viewed as an ex-Muslim, if you're speaking out about certain issues, that's taboo. You're not allowed to do that. And to a great extent, that was done by the left, where they silenced oppositional views of all form and were very, very illiberal. So it wasn't state sanctioned per se, but the effect was very similar because you had pressure being applied to individuals from their employment. If you lose your employment, you can't really do much else. And then you had political pressure from the left, which was able to influence social media. So most large social media companies are based in the US, and so that sort of political pressure made a big difference with the Facebook and Twitter and stuff. They banned ex-Muslims in mass, like many ex-Muslims from the Arab world from over here. We run Wiki Islam. Wiki Islam was banned on Facebook entirely. So even though we have laws in the US that are, in my opinion, much better than Europe for the protection of individual liberty, there are ways around that. And the people that don't really care about liberty were able to circumvent them to a great extent. Recently, what's been going on over the past year, as everybody knows, is the pendulum has swung in the other direction, and we have the other side coming in, and that has relaxed some stuff regarding freedom of speech. Facebook is not as restricted. Wiki Islam is now available on Facebook again due to the political wind shifting. But then you have the other side doing the opposite. You have immigration-related issues, Muslim ban-related issues. So it's just which flavor of bad are you looking at?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely the case, and I think also, I mean, we do focus a lot on sort of left-wing silencing of dissent, very often under the excuse of protecting Muslims from bigotry, and it's wonderful to stop bigotry against Muslims. Obviously, that's something we're all in agreement on. But this idea that criticizing religion or the religious right is the same as bigotry against Muslims is something we've all talked about for many decades. And it's, it is definitely a way of silencing criticism and stopping people from speaking out. But I think also, I mean, in a sense, the right wing very often promotes itself as pro-free expression. But again, that's really not the case, because it's pro-free expression to speak against Muslims and against migrants, and pro-free expression when it comes to Tommy Robinson speaking. But if you have students who are pro-Palestinian, for example, on a university campus, they're very happy to have them even deported. So I think, again, this idea that it's the right wing that defends free speech is not really true. In fact, a lot of the governments in power are right wing, and they are via the law restricting freedom of expression as well. So I think this whole this idea that it's woke politics that stops people from speaking, I think in a way is used to really remove scrutiny of how the right and increasingly the far right are trying to stop freedom of expression.
Say, if your views align with whichever group or not, they will stop you. It doesn't matter what the specific views are. So there's a quote, this is from an Abbasid Caliph, Abu Abbas: "Tolerance is laudable except in matters dangerous to religious belief." You could restate that today: tolerance is laudable except in matters dangerous to political belief, and that'll apply to both sides.
Yeah, no, definitely that is the case. And I mean, I think, there is this constant pressure on us on why do you need to say these things? Why do you have to offend people, hurt people's feelings and sensibilities? And it's become reduced, this whole argument on the right to expression. I mean, it's such a fundamental right. It's a cornerstone of so many rights, And in effect, it's really one of the only things we have as ex-Muslims, as free thinkers, as those who want to challenge the status quo. It's really one of the only things we have in order to be able to do that. Use our writing, our voices, our bodies, even as a way of resisting and standing up for really the rights of non-believers to be able to speak and think as they choose and live as they choose without fear. And so reducing this fundamental right to, and trivializing it to something that is just about the other side's hurt feelings and hurt sensibilities is also, I think, in a way, part and parcel of trying to silence you, because nobody wants to hurt anyone's feelings. No one wants to offend people unnecessarily. And the fact of the matter is, when we listen to surahs of the Quran, or when we listen to hadith, or when we listen to Sharia judges or Islamists talking about how ex-Muslims should be killed, or apostates should, be shunned, and gay people, are perversions, and women who don't wear the veil are sluts. All of the things that we often hear, nobody asks about our hurt feelings. And again, because it doesn't matter. Hurt feelings are irrelevant, really. My feelings are hurt all the time, to be honest. But it's irrelevant in this debate, because it is a way, again, I think, of just silencing this sort of challenge to the status quo, which is hugely important.
One deeper thing is that why are we having this speech to begin with? Why are we having these conversations that are challenging and offensive to begin with? It infantilizes Muslims and Muslim societies that they can't have these conversations, and these conversations are crucial for change to happen. The West did not have free speech. The West did not have the freedoms that it enjoys today. Blasphemy was common, and all of these changes happened because people challenged the status quo. They stood up. They purposefully blasphemed. They forced people to rethink ideas to the point where we are living in a relatively free society now, and maybe it was freer a few years ago. But if you don't allow people to actually change and adapt and confront the contradictions that exist within their belief, they can never grow. So essentially, people that are trying to stop us from speaking, or stop anybody from challenging the status quo, no matter what that status quo is, are saying you're not an adult. You can't actually handle reality. And to me, that is much more offensive than anything we'd ever possibly say.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, Apostate Aladdin just mentioned some people want to hurt feelings on purpose, or they do it for fun. And I'm sure I'm considered one of those people. But for example, the Allah is gay sign at Pride. I mean, we were almost barred from marching in Pride again. We were accused of anti-Muslim hatred and Islamophobia. And it took 8 months for Pride to decide whether they would let us back again. A lot of this, for example, the topless protests I've done, a lot of the work we do when it is challenging taboos and challenging the sacred, it is considered offensive. It is considered something that hurts the other's feelings. And I think that, the question is, I'm sorry if your feelings are hurt, but in the same way that hearing the Quran or listening to the Azan hurts my feelings and makes me physically ill, you can also manage to tolerate opinions of those who hurt your feelings. And the point is that freedom of speech is not dependent on whether you hurt people's feelings or not. And I think the point I want to make too is that the hurt feelings of it's something that we're often told, but I think it's really a cover. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it's a cover to stop people from speaking, because, as I said, our hurt feelings don't seem to matter. And that is, I think, an important point to make.
So the idea of your feelings being hurt is maybe relevant in a monoculture of some form, where your feelings are the only feelings that matter and your ideas are the only ones that matter. If you live in a pluralistic society, if you have Muslims and Christians living together, you have by default offensive feeling, because one person views the one individual as a prophet, the other views it as a god. Same with if you have atheists and Muslims, or ex-Muslims, or any differing groups that exist. So in an Islamic conception of the world, it's like we're the only people that matter, and therefore pluralism is irrelevant. But we do not want to live in that world, and I think most people in the world, outside of Muslim fundamentalists, do not want to live in that world. So going back to what I think Apostle Aladdin was talking about regarding deliberately creating offense, that's great, because people need to be challenged. If you don't believe others have the right to say things that you don't like, that's a you problem. You have to grow up and become an adult and participate in the adult world. When the coronavirus stuff was going on, there was a surah that an Algerian atheist in France put out, Surah Corona. And it was just text, and an Algerian girl was sentenced to jail for posting that on Facebook. like it was simply saying something like wash your hands and be careful when going out and buying food. It was anodyne as hell, but to them it was enough that they were willing to jail people over it. So the line of what is and isn't offensive is very variable and depends on the individual and how exposed to reality they have been.
I mean, I also think that this whole conversation, on offense, it's really looking at the question of blasphemy from the perspective of those who are in power. And I think that's also key when we're discussing this issue to remember that, because in a sense, when we hear things like this is hurtful, this is offensive, it's really those in power that are pushing this narrative and that are trying to promote this climate that doesn't allow people to be able to question those in power in particular who are trying to maintain religion's role. And so I think also that aspect of it is important. The fact of the matter is that when we speak about freedom of expression, it is the freedom of those who are powerless, the freedom of those who do not have anything but their expression in order to challenge the status quo. And so limiting that is really it helps and aids those in power and is to the detriment of those who have none and are trying to gain some rights for themselves.
Change happens through two means, either violence or convincing people. So if you're closing off the avenue of convincing people by limiting speech, you're only leaving the avenue of violence. And that is generally available to the powerful, not the weak.
Thank you so much for both of you. Like, these are like really, really difficult topics, like really challenging ones to go through in just 20 minutes. But I think you both did a really great job, and it's definitely sparked some interest in the live chat. I think we have time for one or two quick question and answers, a little brief Q&A. So this question, I'm going to try and rephrase it a little bit just so it was a little confusing when I first read it. So this question from Asma, Asma is basically asking, do you think Muslims in the UK will listen to you more if they don't know that you're an atheist, but if you pretend to be a Muslim fighting fundamentalism and extremism and advocating for rights? So basically, instead of coming out and saying, I'm an atheist, I left Islam, maybe they'll just, not even want to bother listening to you. But if you, come at it from an angle where you're still Muslim, they might want to listen to you better.
I mean, I think this is always, I think this conversation always looks at the issue from the perspective of those in power. And I think it's so ingrained in us that we feel that it's part of our arguments as well. I mean, I think, do we tell Muslims that you pretend to be an atheist so that I will better understand your Quran and your Hadith and your...
That's a good idea for Atheist Day.
The fact of the matter is that apart from anything else, do ex-Muslims and atheists have a right to say who they are and express their beliefs just as anyone else does, and to be able to advocate for their position just as anyone else does? And I think that's really important. And whether people will listen to you more or not, the point is that do we not first and foremost have a human right to express ourselves and criticize religion and blaspheme?
So I would add, sorry, go ahead. So I would add, there are two levels to this. One on a larger advocacy scale. So what Maryam was talking about, like in the sense that if we're not speaking out, and if we're not like every time you're publicly speaking out as an ex-Muslim, it inspires other people to speak out in their individual context. Either they're coming out publicly, they're becoming advocates themselves, or within their family, they're coming out of the closet. And that sparks change. One becomes two, becomes four, becomes eight. If nobody ever sees you, if every gay person was in the closet, do you ever think we would have achieved the rise we have so far? It would never have happened. And then on the other side of it is on a personal level, in an individual conversation. And I've personally done this myself. I was in a cab and there was a Muslim cabbie and we were talking about things. And at that point, I don't see the point of necessarily coming out and talking about atheism, but you can engage with them in the context they're in. That's a minor 10-minute conversation, sure. But on a broader scale, if you don't come out, things can't change. If you don't talk about being an atheist and why it matters that you speak about where you are, who you are, why you disagree with other people, things will never really change.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when we started the Council of Ex-Muslims in 2007, the Guardian journalist said, well, what are you talking about? They're not ex-Muslims. You're just trying to provoke people and upset people unnecessarily. And obviously, we see a tsunami of atheism and ex-Muslims across the globe. This is something
data.
There's data. There's a lot of Islamic states are talking about. The Iranian regime, for example, talks about a tsunami of atheism. You have the Saudi government equating atheism with terrorism. The Egyptian government, you name it. And so the fact of the matter is, separate from Muslims, do ex-Muslims also not have a right to exist, have a right not to speak, and to engage? And for believers to recognize that this is just as much a right. Freedom from religion is just as much a right as freedom of religion.
You can't have one without the other.
Thank you. And okay, so 2 more questions, just so I can cram them both in. I'm hoping you can keep your responses a little short, just so we can give people a chance to get some answers from both of you. So the first question, this one is just for you, Maryam. Why do you think so many Western feminists are silent about the oppression women face in the Muslim world?
Do you want to ask both the questions now, since we don't have much time?
Oh, sure. So the first question is, why, for you, Maryam, why do you think so many Western feminists are silent about the oppression women face in the Muslim world? And the second question, I think, is for both of you, from Chance Goldstein. Moderates in any religion, I think, are the biggest enablers. Do you find that to be the case with Muslims as it is in Christianity?
I'll answer the second question, and then Maryam can answer both of them. So yeah, I agree entirely. So there's a difference between a moderate speaking about what their beliefs are and how they live their lives, versus them presuming that encompasses everything. And often moderates use their identity to silence all opposition, all criticism. Islam does not say this. Instead of, I reject the bad parts of Islam and I am adhering to the good parts of Islam. You'll never see a modern Muslim say that, yes, Islam talks about child rape and that's okay in Islam, but I reject that. No, they'll deny the entire thing. They'll try to whitewash what it is.
Yeah, I was just trying to find a quote from Martin Luther King. I can't find it right now, but it would be great if you did a search if you haven't heard it. But he does talk about being so disappointed in the white moderate and how they enable. I don't know, Muhammad, if you can find it. It's really a great quote, and I think it's so relevant to a lot of the the arguments that we have with those who are supposedly moderate, but they don't really take a stand on fundamental issues that are important also for Muslims and believers, because a lot of believers also face accusations of, for example, apostasy or blasphemy or silencing because they question, because they dissent, they face shunning, which so these are things that I think are applicable to all. And if there is freedom of expression for ex-Muslims, it definitely helps those within the Muslim community who also want to dissent and question. I mean, on Western feminists, again, I think it is this, there are many feminists who support women in countries under Islamic rule. I work with many of them, including Western feminists. Again, I think this is very much, this sort of right-wing propaganda to a large extent on how, no one cares about Muslim women except for people like Tommy Robinson. I'm not, of course, saying you're saying that, the person who questioned it, but generally that's the narrative. It's Donald Trump and Tommy Robinson really care about women in Muslim communities, and that's not true. There are lots of feminists working, of course, in the same way that you have a large section of the left, and I'm on the left myself, that support and stand with Islamists even as a way of protecting the Muslim community from racism. You have feminists who do the same. I mean, the example of my being barred from one of the universities in Britain, the Islamic Society had me barred, and they were supported by the Feminist Society and the LGBTQ plus society. So, you know, you've got that happening for sure, because of this misguided idea that if you stop criticism of Islam, you're actually stopping racism, and that is racism in and of itself. So I think we need to keep encouraging people to speak out for people and women everywhere. And that means criticizing religion. I mean, a lot of the fight for women's rights in the West was as a challenge to Christianity. I mean, you've got Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was one of the suffragettes, who said that the biggest obstacle to women's emancipation is the Bible and is the church. And we say the same about the Quran and the Hadith and the Islamic jurisprudence as well. We've done a woman's Quran actually at CMB, which is blank because there's nothing good for women in the Quran. And I think someone found the quote from Martin Luther King, where he said,
yeah, Muhammed found it.
Do
you want to read it out loud?
Oh, should I? Sorry.
I can read it if you want, but yeah, I found it as well.
I must confess that over the past few years, I've been greatly disappointed in the white moderate. I've almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride towards freedom is not the white citizen or the KKK, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice. And it carries on. So.
Okay, I think we're now at the end of this amazing live special, and just